question. Suppose, Lord Russell, this film were to be looked at by our descendants, like a Dead Sea Scroll in 1,000 years' time. What would you think it's worth telling that generation about the life you've lived and the lessons you've learned from it?
I should like to say two things. One intellectual and one moral. The intellectual thing I should want to say to them is this. When you are studying any matter or considering any philosophy, ask yourself only what are the facts and what is the truth that the facts bear out. Never let yourself be diverted either by what you wish to believe or by what you think would have beneficent social effects if it were believed. But look only and solely at what are the facts.
Hello, good morning, good evening, good day, good afternoon, and aloha. Welcome to a Saturday kind of quasi-breaking news version of the Unidentified Celebrity Review. It's going to be a fun show. We've got a very interesting panel today. Jane and Rather cannot make it, so we're going to do this a little differently. I reached out to Nick Coffin-Callis over there at Invisible Night School, and I was like, hey, you guys want to talk about this Calvine UFO photo? Absolutely blew up the internet yesterday. Joe Rogan tweeted about it. It was pretty wild, pretty cool day. I thought it was a very cool day, very fun day. But we're going to dive into it. So without further ado, let us bring on our guests for the night. Leah Prime, how are you? Welcome.
Great.
Excellent. Nick Coffin-Callis, what's shaking, my friend? Welcome back again.
Thank you.
Mr. Campbell Moreira.
Hey.
Campbell, how are you? Welcome back as well.
Yeah, thanks.
Although this time you're on my show, you did the Big Phone Home too, right?
And you had me on UCR last June, I think.
Last June. Okay, yeah. So yeah, you've been on a few times. So guys, you had a warm up, pre-show to the show, I guess, if we want to consider my show the show. But this is awesome. So I'm glad you guys are warmed up. We could dive right into it. But before we do, I want to just kind of, I've been listening to your Twitter Spaces mostly while I go to the gym, and I never get to talk in them. But I always there was the other day you guys were talking about experiences, and I was like, oh man, I'd love to jump into this because it's tough to have that experience, and also very difficult to keep that rational, sort of level-headed thought process going. It's really difficult to separate those two. I don't even know if I'd say it's fair to say I've separated them. It's difficult. But there was anyway, before we get into that, what is Invisible Night School? Like, what are you guys doing over there in Twitter, and what is the goal? Like, what is the mission statement, I guess?
Yeah. This is what I do. Sure, Luz. So the Invisible Night School is a small consortium of lay researchers and scholars, and we're analytically exploring UFOs, UAPs, high strangeness, and the cultural and social implications of the phenomenon. And this started a few weeks ago. I got brought into sort of this group, and I was very impressed with, I guess, the intellectual standards or rigor that the group was applying to the subject. I have an academic background, a pretty analytical background, and I was really curious about basically finding a space where people were thinking critically without, I would say, falling into sort of the debunking crowd. And I'll say, or I'll repeat something Campbell said, which is that we're not a monolith. All of us sort of exist on different spectrums of belief or not belief, with different disciplinary backgrounds in different areas of interest when it comes to the phenomenon.
Beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think we're all on slightly different pages, but that brings a lot more perspective to the work we put out, be it on the blog or in the spaces or in the new live streams.
How difficult have you found it to sort of wrangle the conversation and keep it grounded in that philosophy that you just laid out?
So I've been hosting and sort of, I would say, moderating most of these Twitter spaces. One of the things that I'll say is that when I first found this community, actually, I came through your show. I found it, I think, on podcasts. Yeah. And I was really interested because I loved the approach, because I felt like you were bringing this really kind of multidisciplinary approach to the subject. And I found myself in two Pacabras spaces initially, which brought me into, I would say, more of the experiencer community. And from there, it broadened out. And I tell this backstory because the people who are showing up in our spaces and sharing their experiences are quite a variety. We're getting like a really huge spread of backgrounds and philosophies and ideas. And I think having a moderated space to swap ideas does us all a service, because this is such a complex and interdisciplinary subject. You have to take complex and interdisciplinary approaches to even start thinking about it or approaching it with the respect that it deserves.
Well, the one thing that I've noticed is that in regards to that is there's a common thread in that people really want to be heard.
Yes.
On this. Like, they want to be heard, not just listened to. And I find myself sometimes, even me, which is so insane, but it's like trying to look in the mirror, like seeing your real self when nobody's around. But like this idea of kind of rolling my eyes, being like, come on, man. Like I don't know why I do it. I don't know why I do that. It's like something I fall back on. I'm trying to break myself of that habit. But there are moments where I'm just like, oh, what is this doing for this conversation? Like how did we wander off so quickly?
As someone who gets called a debunker, I want to speak to this a little bit. I think the fact that these experiencers are coming into our spaces every opportunity they can just to tell their story really speaks to their own personal belief. And to me, even if I don't necessarily think that they're communicating with NHI or anything like that, they had an experience, and that in and of itself is really interesting. And that kind of speaks to the psychological aspect of the I don't like this word, but the phenomenon, because I don't dismiss these people's witness accounts or these experiences, because they are adding to the story. They're pieces of the puzzle, you know what I mean? And I think they have their own value, and it's really good that given even some of the reputations of some of us as being skeptical, that they're coming in and telling their stories anyway. And I love hearing them.
It's a great experience, and it's part of why I felt so lucky to have the opportunity to be involved with this group, is that everybody who's involved is approaching it from such a positive, open-minded perspective. We want to hear the information because we want to process it and deal with it. There's no ridicule. It's just trying to figure out what's going on. And I think that maybe there's some positive reaction to that, because it's not often that you have the opportunity to sort of see a conversation between someone who would say they're skeptical and someone who's been an experiencer, and not have it devolve into just pure negativity. And I've been seeing that positive side of this happen, and it's been really nice.
When I sort of think about what I would love for the legacy to be for the Invisible Night School, is almost an instruction manual in how to think. Not what to think, but sort of how to think about things, both critically and analytically, without reaching a sort of foregone conclusion. And I bring this up because our most recent space, we talked a lot about things like, what have you changed your mind on? How do you conduct your research? And I think one of the best services you can do to this community is provide the tools and background to people to navigate, in a more scientifically and informationally literate way. Because all of us are curious, we all want to learn, we all want to explore, and giving people sort of the tools on their own journey to facilitate that, I think, is one of the most important things that we can do.
Well, that's what I've enjoyed about the discussion so much, is that even when it does get into those moments where I start going, oh, come on, you guys beautifully accept it, acknowledge it, and then, open the floor to move on. Or not even so much move on, but like you said from earlier, give your very different perspectives on sort of what that person just said and brought to the table. And it never has a feeling of rejection.
Mhm.
And I love that. And again, as someone who's trying to really sort of fight that urge to go, oh man, this feels like bullshit, you know. It's there are, you guys, at least for me, are paving a really beautiful path for me to follow and go, okay, this is a great way to do it, because this is something I've been struggling with. I think for it within our show is how do we talk about these things without insulting the person who's giving these stories. And it's I feel hypocritical, because it's like, I also have a story, I also have an experience. I just don't take it personally when people are like, you're full of shit. Like, I don't care. Like, I'm not I guess I always try to preface one before I tell my story with, hey, I'm just telling you this. I'm not putting this on the table as proof. And all I ask in return is that you do the same with me, you know, if you have a story or whatever.
Well, it sounds like you're being self-reflective. I think we talked about this last time I was on, like reflecting on your own perspective and kind of identifying your own biases is probably the best first step. That's what got me to walk away from being a cynical debunker for so long. And I took my hiatus. So that it's always good. Acknowledge your biases, see how they are affecting your perception and your kind of inclination on these things, and discuss it with people.
And I think that skepticism like has kind of a bad reputation for, you know, some good reasons right now in the UFO community, especially. Like, there is a lot of ridicule, and if it's not at the individuals who are experiencers, it's at their like you know, their heroes and stuff. And so of course you'd experience that negatively. But skepticism historically is open-mindedness and actively seeking for the answers, the reality. And so like, that's what inspires me about this. Debunking is kind of, it's necessary as well, but it doesn't inspire me. It's sort of a reactive thing. And I love that we're sort of like engaging more in the active side. And that's what inspires me.
Let me ask you this. Is there a line though? Is there a line for you, especially as an academic, where somebody will say something or claim something where you have to draw the line in the sand and go, okay, stop? Is there ever that line? Do you have a line like that? Anyone?
I do. It's a gut check, which I know isn't scientific. On Jolly's claims were beyond my line. You know what I mean?
That's a great example. Those were beyond my line as well. As soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, this is bullshit. Like, I want to put the face on it that, you know, okay, man, maybe she's telling the truth, you know?
Sure.
Let's wait and see. Let's see what happens with this expedition. And then nothing happens.
I'm a person with my own opinions and stuff.
Yeah.
You know, if I had to get into it, I'm sure we could, but on the other hand, I'm always willing to listen to it. You know what I mean? And if it interests me, I'll look into it further. The Calvine photo coming out has interested me a bit, and I'm liking looking into this case. It's pretty interesting. There's some but it's something. It's interesting.
No, that's a great segue into this photo. I mean, and that's also a great introduction into Invisible Night School. So, you know, like this idea of that we could come at this from different ways. But for me, I deal with things a lot by just laughing at the situation. You know, how did we get here? Okay. If I was writing this would be hilarious. You know, and so when I hear news, when I see things, you know, I tend to get, that's like the first reaction usually I have is to laugh at it or make fun of it in one way or another, just because that's my nature.
I really
but it's not, you know, it's nothing in with malicious intent. It's always in jest. But let's talk about this Calvine UFO photo.
Yeah.
So I guess I want to start the conversation with, first off, amazing find.
Yeah, really.
Like amazing find. It was that they found this photo. This thing had been rumored forever. Nick Pope had talked about it on the desk of his boss. Like, and the story was out there, and for years, that drawing came out, and then that sort of Photoshop rendering came out, and that people actually still are confusing that. People are still confusing that with the actual photo that just came out. It was such big news. It was such a good find that someone like a Joe Rogan tweeted it about it. This was mainstream news for a 24 hours.
Right.
It's died down a little bit. I'm interested. I didn't watch any late night talk show hosts, but I'm wondering if any of them had touched on it in their monologues on Friday night. But it was cool. It was a really cool day. And especially, I mean, those guys are my friends, and I'm like happy for them. I'm like, dude, this is a great day for Dan and Vinny and all those guys at UAP Media UK and Dr. David Clark, who tracked this thing down. Cool article, cool story, cool day. With that said, maybe just because I'm very spoiled, I wasn't insanely impressed by the photo.
Yeah.
And then something happened, and I can't get it out of my brain. And I'm gonna share this because I think it seemed to have broken the spell of the story. And look, there's analysis still coming out about this. It's very, very early. Let me also say that I could be 1,000,000% wrong, and I'm not putting theories out there. I just want to talk about it.
Yeah.
But let me pull up this bookmark. The thing that really got to me was this. I'm going to share the screen. And if you're on podcasts, I'm sorry that you're on podcasts. But it's the Calvine UFO photo. And somebody on Twitter did a really cool, like, little experiment. And his name was David Skepmit. And he was replying to Mick West. And he has the original Calvine photo here, but it's upside down. And then the very next photo is the same image upside down, but he put some puddles around it. And as soon as I saw this, I was like, I can't unsee it. It's like it is absolutely printed itself on my brain. I'm like, man, this makes. And then I saw the idea of this possibly being a photo of a puddle on the ground. And then somebody had did a high resolution image of it, like up the sharpness of the image with AI, apparently, right? Which I can see Nick's already shaking his head at that. But what that did for me is it kind of reminded me. I went through Hurricane Andrew in '92 in Florida, and when that AI enhancement of the image came out, to me, it looked like a wooden or cardboard sign that had been weathered from sitting in water too long.
Yeah.
Oh man, I'm jumping in here. So I work in AI and machine learning. I particularly work in, I would say, fairly sophisticated public like computer vision and modeling and stuff. And I bring this up because I definitely want to caution against over-indexing on AI's capabilities, particularly when we're talking about shading in something that's a very high latency analog image that's pretty old at this point. I mean, AI, there's this common perception that AI can basically read the Akashic fields out of these kinds of media. And the reality is it's just not the case. If we're talking about digital media, AI's capabilities in this space would be different, but we're talking about a 30-year-old analog image. And so the sort of, I'm very hesitant to ascribe any sort of computer vision enhancement as being useful in the analysis of this as yet.
Yeah, look what the AI did to the plane in the picture.
Yeah, that's true.
Very bizarre.
Yes, no, it distorted as well, but that also reminds me of the AI analysis that they did of that that Roswell, the photo that was taken of Roswell, where they're kneeling down and there's that paper that I can't remember who was holding it, but they tried to read it with digital AI enhancements,
like
and
OCR and stuff.
Right, and they pulled a whole bunch of words out of it. To me, I was like, that does not look like half of the stuff they pulled out of there. So that's, to your point, Leah, I kind of agree with what you're saying. But even with that said, to me, it looked like something that had been weathered by water.
Well, this is the problem with these like photos and the videos and stuff, is that absent any context, if you can look at the image and find like a very plausible, mundane explanation that fits what you see, like it doesn't really matter ultimately then if it is something extraordinary, because it's not going to convince people. So that's the issue that gets raised.
Well, I think for me, now that when things come out, the first thing I start to think of is like, okay, how are they going to pick at this? And then when I saw that image, I bursted out laughing. That was my first response. I just laughed. I'm like, oh my God. The things that people are going to say about this, it's going to be split right down the middle, like it is with everything else.
Yep.
And my whole issue, I don't want to say issue again, like this is a great find. And to me, and I know that like a lot of people don't share this opinion, but to me, if we figure out what this is and it turns out to be mundane, awesome. If it turns out to be something top secret and tech related or non-human, awesome.
Yeah.
Like if it turns out to be an arty photo, yeah, that'll be disappointing, but at least we know what it is.
Right. It's super compelling. And to me, honestly, right now, the most compelling element to this is watching in real time, basically like an emergent myth and engagement with this, right? Where we're watching people like in Twitter spaces, on live streams, we're watching Joe Rogan, like we're all kind of co-creating this reality, like of the tapestry of the UFO community and interpreting this. It's almost like a Rorschach test where people are going to see very different things based on their experiences, based on their background, based on their knowledge, and also honestly, like based on the voices that they're surrounded by, right? If they're deep, in the ultra debunker skeptic space, they're going to have one particular disposition towards this. If they're deep in the woo experiencer space, they're going to have a very different perception of it.
Right.
And it's always going to be passed through basically the prism of the prevailing kind of cultural or social norms that you see.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Leah. And I just wanted to touch on that I, had watched Vinny's Disclosure Team's interview with Dr. Clark from last summer, and it's specifically about this photo. And Dr. Clark says and we're never going to see this photo, never. And so I don't know what to do with it. And then, he's got all these blog posts about the history. And I was really pumped when I saw that this was released, because I had read all these blog posts months ago about it. And I'm like, this photo's out. I thought it was going to be another 70 years or whatever. And when I saw it, I was like, that's so cool looking. And then immediately when I saw the photos showing that it looks exactly like an airplane banner, it looks like a reflection in a puddle, I was like, oh, okay, that's completely plausible and shows that no image is really going to prove anything. But what Leah was pointing out, the emerging myth is such a fascinating part of this, and it has to do so much with the context, right? Like what is going on there.
And I think it's interesting, or excuse me, it's important to call out too that myth can still be true without being real, right? And in many respects, myth is probably the most true thing we have as humans. Because it's like a shared reality or shared sort of centering piece of information or experience that we can all sort of partake in and interpret. And the other thing, I had brought this up on our live stream earlier, and this is just to add a little bit of color to the conversation. So my actual education and initial professional background was in rare books and manuscripts. I worked on special collections of European provenance. And I bring this up because there's, for instance, there's always huge amounts of history about things like Shakespeare's First Folio. It is well known that there's 65 copies of it and that's it, and there's nothing else. And then every couple of years, a news article comes up that somebody found a copy of Shakespeare's First Folio in the ancillary library facility at Yale or at Oxford or at the Library of Congress. And I've worked at some of the largest special collections and rare book research institutions in the country. And up and down the board, whether you're talking government, academic, or private facilities, the archives in these spaces are decades and decades behind when it comes to archiving and documenting what they have. And I call this out because I don't find the sort of reemergence of this photo particularly unique or unusual, given probably just how much information is existing in the UK's archives. Like to me, it doesn't seem particularly, there's nothing anomalous to me about it sort of resurfacing unexpectedly or sort of reemerging, because this happens all the time, even at like really well-run and well-established institutions.
On the other hand, I do want to note that if someone were to create this photo, we were given the blueprint back in 1996, essentially. We've had several recreations and drawings done. With some notable discrepancies, particularly Nick Pope always talked about the countryside being in the background. And not only was that a detail that, you know, hypothetically he could have misremembered that, but he spoke to that specifically because his MOD experts that analyzed the photo used that background to determine the size and shape of the thing. You know what I mean? That is a little suspicious to me, especially because this photo is, it's a white background. Like you said, it does look like a reflecting rock in a pond. I showed the picture to my wife really quickly. I flashed it to her. I said, "Hey, what's this a photo of?" And she said, "An island," like immediately. But there are some problems with that idea, the reflection, mainly dealing with the plane, I believe, and kind of the way the posts look. I was looking at Metabunk before this and seeing what some of those people were coming, because we know that this photo is going to be picked apart, especially by them. And I'm sure they'll recreate it in multiple ways, but that kind of speaks to the fact that it's one photo. It's an anomalous photo, but it can't speak to it. You can't draw any conclusions from it, right?
Mick West was already in his pool.
Yeah.
Mick West is burning himself and taking pictures in his pool, dude.
If I were him, he should just be rolling around in his piles of money. And like, I mean,
dude,
it's a nice
I'd be
pool.
all up in that.
It's a really nice pool.
Well, I actually asked him to come on the show tonight. He wasn't able to come, because I thought, man, this would be a really cool roundtable if we could get Mick in here. But he did want me to pass along a message, and he says, "Thanks for the invite. Unfortunately, I'm unable to attend this evening. If you could relay, though, I'd just like to encourage people to keep an open mind. Consider the possibility that what we are looking at is a hoax. Explanations like kites or reflections in water might seem silly, but what's more silly, someone hoaxing something for fun, or the U.S. testing super secret anti-gravity technology in full view of a public road? Question mark. I hated that kite explanation. I thought that was the worst one of them all. But reflections in water, I don't think it's as silly as it seems. And if I'm being honest, I mean, just to me, and again, this is not a knock on the work or you know, and again, we have the convenience of just being able to sit here and kind of give our opinions on something that might have taken, it has taken years to surface. But yeah, I mean, it's tough. But the thing for me is that the picture, like you said, Nick, there's nothing in the background where we can be like, okay, that's the landmark. That's exactly where the picture was taken. I was trying to look up the weather because I wanted to know how much it rained in Scotland that, in the days up to, because August 4th is my birthday. That was my 10th birthday, 1990. So I was like, oh, that's cool. I wonder if I could look up the weather. And I couldn't find the weather. It was weirdly odd. I don't know if you guys know good weather sites to look up stuff like that. But yeah, I couldn't do it by a simple Google search. It was impossible. But I was curious to know if it rained, because if it did rain, you had a couple hikers and they were taking photographs, and they saw this, I like cool reflection photos, like that's in museums and art, and that exists. And, as I look at it, it kind of like that corner that is the diamond kind of looks like something coming out of the water, and the plane is the bottom half of it coming out from the other end of the water. I think it's connected.
Well, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say now I haven't had a chance to read it, but there's a pretty extensive Reddit thread right now on UFOs that basically steps through the geometry to make the case for this being a water reflection. I just skimmed it earlier, but it may be worth kind of looking through for a more like systematic step-by-step breakdown.
I'm just like, those are my gut reactions to it. That's just kind of like, that's just what it looks like. Of course, that could just be my brain, doing that thing. What is it? What do they call that?
Pareidolia.
Pareidolia, where your brain just makes the pattern for you, and you're like, oh, it's a sign in the water, and I figured it out. Like, no, I have not figured this out. I could be totally wrong. Could be UFO, could be alien. We don't know. But the problem with the picture is, like, we don't know how fast it's going. We don't know what direction it's going. We don't know what kind of jet that is specifically. I saw that Tim McMillan and Graham Rendell, who did a lot of help on this, and he does a really great writing on the UFO and Foo Fighters, and they got into it a little bit about where that kind of Harrier would have been at that on those dates, and there were no Harriers, according to Tim McMillan, in that area. And that it was a Phantom, a C-90 Phantom, I think. Yeah. I could have that model wrong, but there was a discrepancy on if that plane was even in that area. And from the photos, I mean, maybe you could tell what kind of plane it is. I mean, I know, there's always that chart that Lou Elizondo references that, they have to know what is in the sky, and they look at the chart. And then there's, of course, that funny meme where everything is, what it is, everything is a satellite or swamp gas or something, with every shape. But yeah, I mean, I don't know.
I think this is.
Go ahead, Campbell.
I think this is a great segue into the context of this photo, because we don't even know who took the photo. We, like you were mentioning, it was a good idea. Like, look at if it was raining. We actually, according to David Clarkson, we don't know when it was taken. Because this was sent to a Scottish newspaper alleging to be XYZ, and then it was forwarded directly to the Ministry of Defense. Like, we don't have the beginnings of trying to figure out actually what the photo, where it is, like what it even shows. And this is actually part of David Clark's thing that I find so interesting, the context of it, right? Initially, for years, David Clark thought it was like, obviously, or not obviously, but he said like the most likely explanation is a hoax. That was his conclusion. And in his new piece, I'm sure actually it would be an interesting subject as well. He says he's convinced now that it does show a physical craft. And he says he thinks that craft is an American secret project. And he said that his thoughts on that evolved from his work with the UK National Archives. They actually hired him to declassify a bunch of their work with them to post them publicly. And in 2009, he got a trove of documents showing that the Ministry of Defense took this photo very seriously and contacted the CIA asking, like, are you flying your stuff over our airspace? And then the CIA was like, no. And then the photo ended up going through Defense Intelligence Agency over the Pentagon. And then the Pentagon thought it was a real object in the photo. And then they are calling the MOD back, being like, are you guys behind our backs deploying our technology sharing program to create your own spy craft? Like, what is this thing? And so that's what David Clark said, this correspondence where that all these intelligence agencies are taking it so seriously, that convinced him. He's like, well, maybe it is a craft. But once again, we can't be certain that way either, because Mick West rose to fame originally in UFOs because of his discovery that after, 2 years of the Chilean intelligence services investigating that aircraft, after 1 day, Metabunk discovered the exact plane it was. So intelligence agencies do make these mistakes and falsely elevate things. So that's something that we should keep in mind.
Right. All that back and forth could either speak to its authenticity if you want to appeal to the authority of these people, or I think that it shows that, let's mention that compelling evidence is completely subjective, and it depends on who's looking at it. No intelligence agency is too clever that they can't be fooled.
So one of the things I want to bring up for me, which is what makes this compelling and what makes sort of some of the bigger cases compelling for me, are basically what I would call like this cross-system verification. And I don't just mean like scientific instruments, but I also mean sort of this complex organization of, say, the Ministry of Defense, and then these photographs, and then the different narratives from the witnesses, and the mythos that has arisen around this photo. And to me, like, that's almost, you almost have to build like a meta model around how to analyze this and sort of bring in all these different resources to help understand things, because the photo in and of itself it's ambiguous by any standards. It's an ambiguous photo. And so the more you can bring in, and I don't just mean quantitative information, I mean qualitative, like subjective things like narratives, to help contextualize it, that's very important. And like, I don't feel like we have sufficient context yet, or I feel like I don't have sufficient context to draw a particular conclusion.
No.
There are things that matter to me that I would want to know in order to frame and further dive into assessing the validity of this. And these are things, I mean, candidly, like knowing more about the people who took these photos. Like, I hate to say this, and certainly nobody's character is on trial, but I want to know about them. How did they respond to this? What kind of character witness is available to these individuals? Because, I mean, look, I worked in restaurants in my 20s. I know exactly what happened after work at 9 p.m. when you would go out on a walk.
Exactly what I was thinking.
And and I'm not, this is not accusation at all, but it is saying that if we're going to give this the respect it deserves, it means diving into basically every facet of this and not just relying on Ministry of Defense reports or newspaper clippings or photographs that spent 30 years in some guy's desk.
Amen. No, you make, I mean,
all right,
it's such
we're done.
Point.
Podcast over.
Yeah, we're done. I think it's, it's one of those things that for me, I take it and I go, okay, interesting, very cool. Not really sure what I could do with it. I don't know if it convinced. I mean, apparently it convinced, Joe Rogan. But here's the thing: does it, like, at this point?
Well, and since when is Joe Rogan the arbiter of truth?
No, he's not. He's definitely not the arbiter. No, but he is sort of an arbiter of the zeitgeist. He totally does. He does move the needle on things, and so it's important when he does. Whatever your feelings are on him, it definitely, for me, it always highlights the subject. And for me, this highlights the subject. It brings more eyeballs, maybe some more curiosity, more thinkers like you, Leah and Campbell and Nick, and more shows pop up and more people ask questions. And I think that's a good thing. So inevitably, it's a good thing. But even if this doesn't show proof of UFOs or extraterrestrial beings or secret tech or, ultra terrestrials or whatever, it does, like, I don't know if it helps or hurts. Like, it's tough to determine, because this is going to be like forever. It's going to be split right down the middle, but I don't even know if it matters, because, like, if this phenomenon is real, this photo, who gives a shit? Right. Like who cares? And I mean, to me, like, I don't need a photo. I don't need a photo. I don't need a video. I don't need any of that stuff. I've been convinced for a long time because I've seen it, but I know I can't, it might be a data point, but it's not proof. And so, I think it brings more eyeballs. It brings more curiosity. And for me, I think it's a good thing. I think the release of this photo, the finding of this photo, and the scrutiny and the murder board of this photo is also just as important, like just as worthy of explanation. These questions are all valid. They're not rude. They shouldn't be declared as heresy. Like, these are valid questions that we should be able to ask friends or ask colleagues, and simply discuss. And I don't think we should do it through Twitter. P.S. But Lord Ludacris with a $5 donation says, fantastic conversation. I've been sad that Nick Pope hasn't taken a victory lap, sending people to a recreation that is different than the original. I was actually going to segue to Nick Pope, and you nailed it perfectly, Lord Ludacris. So thank you. What do you guys think about Nick Pope just being like, not going to comment on it, and then comes back out and says something along the lines of, yep, still not going to comment about it, just Nick, and then just a tweet that just says Nick Pope. And then I found out later that there's also a British football player named Nick Pope, and I saw that Burger King had tweeted Nick Pope, not knowing that. I was like, oh, that's hilarious. Burger King is in on the Nick Pope joke for this Calvine UFO video.
Yeah.
Okay, great. That's funny. And then somebody tweeted at me like, nah, that's actually another person, just ironically enough.
It's like the
I
normie
was
Nick
like, wow.
Pope.
Yeah.
The reaction to this has been kind of interesting.
It's interesting.
You can interpret it in a couple different ways too. One, I mean, he, like I said earlier, he's been hyping this photo since 1996.
Yeah.
And now that we see it, it's not all that it's been talked up to be. But also, I do want to raise those discrepancies I mentioned earlier. He specifically said that the landscape was in that photo. Maybe this isn't the same picture. You know what I mean?
Well, that's what I asked Dan Zetterstrom in a Twitter thread.
Mhm.
I was like, well, if let's say this is a military plane, how do we know that the U.S. military or the MOD didn't get photos of it? And then that story is what got passed around. But also maybe some hikers caught photos of it because, you know, Mick West's question, like, you know, this thing being, you know, very visible from a public road doesn't make any sense if it's top secret U.S. tech. Why would they do that? But I would argue, well, they did it with the stealth bomber.
Right. That to me is not an effective debunk, right? Like there's completely compelling arguments that humans, not just Americans, but humans are exposed to advanced technology all the time to gauge like psychosocial reaction. Like this is, I mean, shit, look at marketing focus groups, like full stop, same deal, you know?
Right. I mean, Frank Luntz, Jesus Christ, Frank freaking Luntz, man. You guys know who that is, right? The Fox News temperature gauge on polls. Like he would pose questions to focus groups, and he would do focus groups for the Republican Party and be like, okay, yeah, instead of calling it, you know, war with Iraq, call it the war on terror. And people like the sound of the war on terror, so that's what they coined it, you know. And that was all Frank Luntz, man.
Everybody here should watch some Adam Curtis documentaries to get a real idea about how much of our reality is the construction of, you know, our media consumption. Not to get totally tinfoil hat here.
Oh my gosh,
but like
it's not a proper representation of what's going on, that's for sure.
No.
Well, I'd also like to point people to the interview that Dr. Clark did with Vinny from Disclosure Team from last summer, where it's actually about Calvine, specifically the full hour. It's really neat because Dr. Clark actually brings up that there's proof that the United States has historically tested advanced aircraft in UK airspace, and to the extent that it was actively, there's evidence that they triggered defense alerts with actual fighter jets from the UK launch to intercept American secret tech projects in UK airspace. So there's actually a precedent for this based on Dr. Clark's own research.
And there was a lot of buzz at the time about the Aurora project too, like in the media. So the public was kind of aware of this going on too. And like you mentioned earlier in our last show, it was right before what war was it?
The Gulf War. It was 2 days.
It started 2 days before this photo was allegedly taken.
So there was a lot of things going on in people's minds and stuff too at the time. So I'm completely open to it being something like that. I'm not terribly impressed with the photo itself, but there's a lot more mystery to this story. You know what I mean? Who are these photographers? Is this photo the same as theirs? Why are there such discrepancies in the narrative? You know, there's still a lot more to dig into. I think it's a pretty cool case, and it's a cool photo, and it's good to actually see something that we've been hearing about for so long.
Right.
You know, like putting a solid image to it. That's pretty cool.
Well, and something that I loved about it is like Dr. Clark's work about the internal communications. And I think that's what's going to last from this, is that we have a written out account of what happens when the intelligence agencies think they have a real photo of a UFO. Right. Because that's what we saw there. It's the CIA, the UK MOD, Defense Intelligence, the Pentagon, and they're all like, what is this craft? Like, that's fascinating. If it's a puddle reflection and but we get to see like how would they actually be behaving if this was a UFO. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I want to call out to Dr. David Clark's sort of change in perception. One of my favorite quotes from Ram Dass is, "My commitment is to truth and not to consistency." Right? Like we should all be so brave and so egoless, to be willing to change and adjust our views when presented with compelling evidence. But the other thing I'll bring up too is just at a meta level is having really well instrumented heuristics for how and when you defer to expertise, right? Like, given what I know about the Calvine photo and what David Clark has written, this guy has way more on the ground applied and participatory knowledge in this subject than I do. And therefore, until I can find someone else who I think their expertise would exceed his, I'm inclined to defer to his read on this subject, right? Just like he
No, that's
deferred
a
his
beautiful point.
expertise to the Ministry of Defense, because their knowledge and intimacy with this subject and aircraft, whether known or unknown, is going to exceed his. And I think, just to make a broader point to the community, I think that there is this necessity to, with humility, defer expertise and have a good understanding of the limits of our own knowledge.
That's a good point. I mean, well, I was talking to this with Alejandro Rojas, and I was kind of giving him sort of my things that what I think people are going to pick apart about this, right, and sort of say about this. At least from the skeptical point of view, and that I already know what the believers and folks who are all in are going to say as well. But the thing he told me was that David Clark is pretty skeptical. Like he doesn't. And I wasn't familiar with a ton of his work, so I was like, oh, okay, that's also something that is kind of going for. I like on the pro side of like the believers are right, because people are taking sides with this, and that's what we do. We get tribal with things. And I think it's just like, hey, where does the information lead? And then let's make a decision on how we feel about it, but I found that comforting in that, like you just said, like we have to defer to him because he's been on the ground. He's done the legwork. He's done all the reporting on it. I mean, in the article that it described that he was knocking on doors. He was asking cafe shop workers and most people he'd given up. He had essentially just given up on the whole thing. So that just goes to show.
Poses kind of a question to me. It doesn't actually specifically say how he got into contact with Craig Lindsay, who gave him the photo. Do you happen to know?
I don't.
No. No, that's a good point. I guess I didn't think of that.
You see quotes from this person, Craig Lindsay. He said, "Oh, I've been waiting for someone to get a hold of me because I've been holding on to this picture." How did he get hold of it?
Was it the gentleman who took the photo? And by the way, somebody was asking to put up the photo. I'm looking for it right now. Sorry. Yeah, I don't know.
We don't know. There's a lot of things we don't know about it, but it's compelling to me. I think it's definitely worth looking into.
Well, just to mention Dr. Clark's history, like he actually was like a believer for a long time. He became a journalist. He became a doctor of folklore and journalism. He now is an associate professor at Sheffield Hallam University. So he's been an excellent researcher and journalist for decades now. And he was actually he's the one who originally FOIA'd the Condine report and had it. First person to have that in his hands in 2006 because he FOIA'd it, and then the National Archives in the UK put him in charge of disclosing more of these documents. So he's had hands-on, and he knows a lot of these people from looking at like thousands of pages of these memos with their names on them in the internal records. So the guy, he's going to be remembered as one of the greats. And right now, it's interesting to see him finally kind of break out with this photo, even if the photo itself is maybe not especially spectacular.
It's still got to feel pretty great for him, though.
Yes.
I mean, I think, and that feeling's justified,
Yeah.
Sure. I think I mean, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to uncover something like this, but that is a good question. Exactly how? I mean, I'm curious to know if the old man that they took the photo with, who actually had the photo. I mean, it could have been as simple as maybe he heard they were looking for it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what blows my mind is that this photo was sitting in his desk for 30 years. And when you read the Daily Mail article with him, he was like, I've been waiting for someone to ask me about this, right? Which is, I mean, I have complicated feelings about that. And I also, I mean, if we are to take this as something that is evidence of anomalous phenomenon, in a way, it almost reminds me of like Philip Corso, in the sense that you have someone who's at the end of the tenure of their lives. People have all sorts of ideas about what kind of legacies they'd like to leave and what those legacies may look like. And I feel like this is almost a trope that you see with some of this information. You know, you have people who are trying to either rehab or re-enter the conversation based on their histories in it. And it's not a value judgment or a character judgment whatsoever about this person. All of us, I expect, do this. But his decision to kind of bring it forward or enter the conversation towards the end of his life, I think, is also very interesting. And I also wonder if that may be where future disclosure or meaningful information will also start coming from, because the people who know this information are quickly becoming older and probably considering what their legacies are in this space.
Absolutely.
Do you think we'll get more as, I guess, we get more legislation, we get more public awareness? I mean, do you think we get those older legacy types that come out?
Yeah, I mean, I think you almost have to incentivize people coming out, right? Like you have
How
to,
would you incentivize them?
Right, like, so there's the first pass, which was just providing some kind of safe harbor from, legal repercussion. But I also think that you have to basically put almost like ethnographic effort into conducting this research and trying to reach out to people who may have known or experienced or encountered these materials and bring them into the conversation. I mean, think about what like your grandparents may know or may not know. Do you think they're on the internet looking for UFO Twitter spaces to talk about what they saw when they were serving the Pacific Theater? Like, it doesn't scale very well, but you literally would want to do like almost an ethnographic or folklore style kind of interrogation of the subject and meet with people one-on-one. And I think the other way is to honestly disintermediate it from the government, like to bring in either private or publicly funded research institutions to conduct this work, because I do think that the government's involvement undermines a lot of the reliability or authenticity of this. And we want to take questions about justification out of it.
So you don't think there's any role for government in this?
Whoa, I did not say there was no role for government.
No, I'm not saying that's what you said. I'm asking the question. Do you think there was, so what is the role for government in this discussion?
I think, candidly, I think the government's responsibility is to clear the path and facilitate these conversations from a legal point of view, right? Like to provide some sort of either immunity, like some sort of qualified immunity around these disclosures, particularly under different circumstances. Say if you've you served in the military over 30 years ago or things like that. And I think that's the government's responsibility. The responsibility is to create a safe harbor for individuals that elect to disclose this information.
Do you think the government moves that have been made are the first steps of clearing that path? Because to me, I feel like they are.
Yeah, I think that they're starting to have those conversations in a serious and constructive way.
Yeah.
Well, the Roswell in stuff in the 90s is an interesting template, isn't it? Because they actually did do investigations. They actually compelled and it's important to delineate, right? Like the representatives versus the institutional sort of ongoing thing, because they brought the Air Force out. Air Force actually made a statement. They revealed the mogul side of things, if you accept that side. So there is a role for government. They do force the intelligence community to sort of issue statements. And just one thing I'd like to point out, it's an interesting question what the role of government is, because like Dr. Clark's own work getting FOIA documents in 2006, he got the like the UK's Condign study. It kind of came right after all of this, Calvine. And we see with the records, like they thought it was a real image of something that they couldn't identify. And like in Condign, that report says they believe that these UFOs exist as a phenomenon that has the characteristics that historically ufologists attribute to it. And then it says, we're going to keep this secret. And they even kept it secret from elected members of parliament with oversight over the defense intelligence agencies based on The Guardian and BBC News and Wired reporting. And they said they're going to keep it secret because they're trying to militarize what they can derive from studying it. And they are afraid that the Russians are already ahead of them on the subject. So with that being the document that UK intelligence was using to brief their leadership, according to the document itself, I mean, it's like the intelligence community is working on this in one way, and they're actually working with the public in the dark, the elected members of government with oversight. So there's a very interesting precedent there that suggests that these things are in conflict. And if the intelligence agencies are perceiving it to be a sufficient risk based on their own internal assessments, like they're very reticent to provide information.
Yeah, one of the things that does concern me, I would say, as a citizen, is the leveraging of UFOs and this subject in general as a way to further government expansion of surveillance. And I see this subject frequently as basically a Trojan horse to introduce greater like surveillance initiatives or arguments to be legislated on. And that to me is deeply, deeply concerning and troubling.
Yeah, I think you have a right to have that concern. To me, I don't think you need the UFO topic to get those things into law, to get that expansion. Like, you don't need this. You don't need this cover. You could just write it into the NDAA. Nobody's going to blink an eye at it.
Well, I mean,
is that fair?
The Patriot Act kind of fell after 9/11
Yeah.
and stuff, so it did need a kind of a catalyst event to get support. You are seeing the government kind of use this as I'm seeing them use it kind of as a political platform on the representative level. I don't know. I do like that there are better.
I mean, it's
military people.
It seems like the expansion of insight or would be in airspace. I don't see how it. And I mean, maybe there's an airspace between point A and point B where they're not allowed to, like, for example, I mean, we all know that there are satellites that can take pictures of license plate numbers clearly. So are they allowed to just take pictures of women tanning on top of buildings? You know, are they allowed to take pictures of whatever? You know, if there is some sort of buffer zone where they're not allowed to do that, and this legislation is eroding that buffer zone, then I can see how that could be very worrisome.
Well, when you say allowed, who do you mean accountable to? Who's doing the allowing?
Right, exactly. Well, who's doing the allowing? Where's the information going to? What is it being used for? It opens up a whole can of worms. But to me, and this is sort of the one thing I kind of found, I don't know if it's a flaw in sort of the libertarian style of thinking, like, you know, but for me, the way I see technology going in 50, 60 years, like social security numbers, like they're going to have your DNA, they're going to have your eye prints, they're going to have your fingerprints, they're going to know what you're looking at when you're browsing the internet, so that when you walk by a bus stop, it can advertise to you specifically.
Yeah, dude, that's already in progress, building algorithmic marketing systems.
So, but like, I mean, to me, like, but I'm saying, like, how do you fight that? Like, at some point, like, I think we're going to be completely transparent as far as who we are, and this idea of privacy is going to be, it's gone.
Philip K. Dick's vision of the future is the most accurate one that we have. Like, let's be real.
Lay it out for me. Wait a second. I want to hear this vision of the future, because I don't know. I'm not familiar with it.
Well, I mean, Philip K. Dick basically saw the intrusion of technology as something that could be used basically in a predictive manner to they made it into a movie. I don't
Minority
watch
Report.
Minority Report, right?
Yeah.
But and also just that they're also just capital. It's not just surveillance and under the auspices of public safety, but also basically as methods to wring money out of people, right? Like opportunities to monetize and capitalize on virtually every facet of lived experience. And I mean, let's be real, the extractive attention economy, we're already in that space. Like, that ship has sailed, and you're watching the backlash of it now with the creation of, like, quote unquote dark forest communities, like communities that meet off of the major social platforms to sort of disintermediate the advertising and algorithmic disruptions of things like Twitter or Facebook.
Right. Well, I mean, but then going back to the original question, I mean, do you think that, you know, like, do you think that the government needs this UFO topic to cover more legislation that leads us closer to that reality?
Not in its entirety, but it may be a facet to it. You know, it's something I don't want to discount. It's something to be aware of moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it also speaks to trying to drive additional financial support for the military, right? Like these all sort of speak to the same thing, which is re-empowering the I would say, quote unquote, military industrial complex, in ways that are new and novel and invasive.
Yeah, well, it's like with the UK, report, like the reporting from The Guardian showing that the ministers in charge of oversight were not briefed on a top-level report that compiled the last 30 years of Ministry of Defense investigations of UFOs. And they concluded that UFOs are real in that top-secret report, and they didn't tell the minister in charge of military oversight. Like, there's something wrong with that. We're in a democracy, like, that's something that needs to be communicated to people who are being elected by the public. And if we just look back to the original reason the CIA took this subject seriously, it was always a national security threat, as they describe in their own internal memos, from the Russians. And it was in 1952 when people were calling in with such frequency reporting UFOs that the military communication systems became jammed. And so the primary concern they identified was that if a Russian attack occurred at the same time as an overwhelm of the domestic communication systems through UFO reports, they could be caught, whatever, they could get screwed. And so it's always in their own internal documents, regardless of whether UFOs are like real, non-human intelligence. Like, they've always in their own documents said, like, oh, we're mostly afraid about Russia getting the upper hand on us.
For people who want to look into what Campbell was just talking about, that's the Robertson panel.
And the memos that lead up to it that were internal, yes, exactly.
Well, Campbell, I mean, this is a question for the panel. I mean, would you say it's fair to say that the best UFO evidence on the table has come from one form or another, the U.S. military? Like, or one way or another, they were involved, or it happened on their watch, like Roswell, the Gimbal, the Go Fast, the Tic Tac, the Robertson panel, the Project Blue Book, Project Grudge. I mean, there's a list of things. Cash Landrum, the Pennsylvania crash, Kecksburg, all of these have just the fingerprints of military, feel. And I mean, even this picture, the Calvine UFO, the idea that the intelligence communities within the MOD and the Department of Defense were like, what the hell is this thing? They were confused.
It's quite interesting. Yeah, I'd say, and maybe we can go around, but I'd say the smoking gun to me is in the CIA was the January 1953 Robertson panel, where the CIA essentially, not paraphrasing, they established like Foo Fighters seem to be something. We think that what we're seeing now with UFOs are a continuation of that. We aren't exactly sure what it is, but we're recognizing there are threats from it. We're going to try to sort out the threats, and then they say like, the innumerable unfigured out mysteries of the universe aren't a direct national security concern, so we'll put that aside for now. And then 50 years later, that I think the most decisive thing that exists is the Ministry of Defense's 2000 report, because they say in that report that UAP exists is indisputable, credited with the ability to hover, land, take off, accelerate to exceptional velocities, and vanish. They can outmaneuver any known aircraft or missile, manned or unmanned. So they're describing the objects. They're saying they're certain that they exist, that their word's indisputable. Like, there's nothing else like that. The reporting from The Guardian says that the top leadership in the UK military intelligence was briefed that UFOs are real with those features. Like, the fact that isn't like the number one thing everybody tied. And that was David Clark who got that report FOIA'd.
Right.
So like that to me is the smoking gun, and that is always going to be sort of the most prominent document. Because if there was an American document that said that exact phrase that I just said, like it would be insane, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, agreed. What do you think, Nick?
I was gonna bring up what Campbell brought up. Though I'm really impressed that he can rattle off those lines like
I
that.
said them so many times.
Yeah,
It's like my
Yeah.
thing.
yeah. I'm not sure if he's reading off a PowerPoint. Or if this is just all memory. Yeah,
Oh, it's
yeah.
He's been trying to share it with everybody for a really long time, and people aren't listening. I
love it.
really recommend that you check out his website.
But don't worry, man. We'll open up the runway here for you a lot more. I promise.
Perfect. No, I agree with Campbell. The content report, I think, is probably the best.
Yeah. Leah. Is it Leah?
Ditto.
Leah?
It's Leah.
Leah. Okay. Apologies.
Yeah, I mean, look, I on this subject, I largely agree with Campbell and Nick. And I think, what concerns me is, I mean, where we see the work being done outside of the government, we see it in, the Galileo project, maybe, or even NASA. Like, I actually think like the work being done by NASA is potentially super compelling and super important, because it's also disintermediated, at least in theory, from like the military applications and, the feds or whatever. But thus far, yeah, I think the most meaningful research has been produced by governments.
I agree. And what's
I
funny
would love
to
for
me
it to
is-
not be the case. Like, let me be clear. Like,
Yeah,
I would love
yeah.
for there to be something like RAND or like the Brookings Institute specifically dedicated to this subject, because I think not only will you get more interdisciplinary thought in the space, but getting, like I said, I think there's something to be said for getting sort of the federal government and these alphabet soup of three-letter agencies out of the conversation as much as possible will also legitimize the findings more, because I think we're also at a time in our kind of culture and history where institutions of record through the government, like their legitimacy has been undermined so substantially that no matter which side of the aisle you're on, you tend to mistrust or not trust the government.
And I just want to toss
Yeah.
in very quickly, if it's okay, that the Robertson panel report in January 1953, just what Leah said there, it cites specifically a Dr. David T. Griggs, a geophysicist professor at UCLA, as one of their inside sources. And he's a co-founder of RAND. And so RAND, as a co-founder, from the very beginning of that organization, was being... in the first days of the CIA, being tasked with figuring out what UFOs are, what their threat level is, and stuff like that. So it's been in it from the very beginning.
That's awesome. Well, also, I think well, I was gonna say real quick, just like I think that you're gonna get organizations like that starting to join the conversation because of James Webb. I think that's gonna open the door, and I think James Webb maybe who knows what history will eventually say, but I think that might have opened the door for this conversation to really start getting into gear, because the conversation has been forced. The hand has been forced by our own technology. Like, you better start talking about this now, because this telescope is going to find something really cool, and it's going to confirm some kind of techno signature or biosignature that may or may not confirm that this is a possibility. And who knows? I mean, maybe Galileo captures a really killer picture of one, or like you said, Leah, those institutes start at the very least talking about it and really taking the idea seriously and studying it. I hope that's the case.
I mean, I'm a lifelong Art Bell acolyte, and I can so distinctly remember his conversations about the Brookings Institute research, which basically reached the conclusion that even if there were extraterrestrial life, it should never be disclosed because of the concerns about sort of social and cultural upheaval associated from it or with it. And this is a report done by Brookings like a long time ago, 30, 40, 50 years ago. But I think about that too. And I mean that in kind of the least tinfoil hat way, right? But that may still be a prevailing philosophy, that this is there's a sense of sort of protection, or people, the state acting in loco parentis and deciding what is best for people.
Would you be upset if that was the case?
Oh, I have complicated feelings about that. Yes, but, or no, however.
Yeah.
And this is probably one of those. So I've only been into this community for a very short time now. And one of the things that I've been so struck with, both having worked as a library and information science professional, and also now kind of circling back into a community attempting to conduct its own research. And I say this without condescension, is the honestly abysmal scientific and information literacy that's common. And I feel like there has to be so much work done collectively to help people navigate critically their world. I don't just mean UFOs, I mean in general. That I think there are compelling arguments that not all information should be disclosed to the population until there is some sort of shared frameworks about navigating reality. I mean, we're living through a period that's effectively like an epistemological crisis. Like, we're watching the unwinding of consensus reality, which probably started about 20 years ago with September 11th, kind of reach its foregone conclusion where, you know, people's experiences, particularly in America, are so different based on where they live and their demographics. You may as well be living in different countries and different realities, and people construct their own sort of myths and traditions around those realities. And until we have more of, I think, a shared or consensus understanding of the world, will not be done a good service by having like world-changing information released en masse.
I've always wondered about that kind of idea behind keeping the secrecy, as though we don't want mass panic among people. Look at the world's reaction, or look at the United States' reaction to things like COVID, to the 2020 elections. You know, cognitive dissonance is not something to be underestimated. I feel like if, you know, you could have someone come out and be like, oh no, ET has been here, here's like high HD video of it, half the people wouldn't believe it anyway. You know,
well, how many people would actually care? I mean, that's the other thing. So many people honestly are concerned with paying their rent and getting health insurance coverage and keeping their lights on, that like, how do you convince them to care about something at the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Like, on one hand, yes, this may be the most fundamental and important question ever in human existence. But on the other hand, like, that shit doesn't pay the bills. And, you know, most people are so precarious that they're not going to care if it's aliens or not. They care about if they're getting paid on Friday.
Right. No, that's the bottom line, because Stone Cold said so. But that's the discussion we had after our Nope, after watching Nope. Like, would we have believed, you know, again, sitting in the comfort of our armchairs here, we get the luxury of being Monday morning quarterbacks, and we see that, let's just say Nope was a true story, it really happened, and we saw the photo that was taken out of the well. And maybe somebody found the canister of film that the creature spit out after it died, and it. Did I just ruin the movie for you, Nick? Spoiler alert!
I haven't seen it.
Oh, nobody's seen it. Oh my god. Okay, so anyway, they get the whole point of the movie is they want to get this money shot of this UFO, and they do in a couple different ways. But you know, the question was, well, would we believe it? Or would we sit here and would we, you know, analyze it just like we did with this Calvine UFO photo?
Right.
You know, and bring up all of these possibilities of what it could have been.
What's the threshold for people to actually believe this stuff at this point, right? Like what would actually, because I have that internally conversation, that conversation internally all the time about what evidence would I find so compelling that I would feel like my curiosity had been satisfied. Right. And like, and I'll say, and I've, man, everyone who's heard me, I always talk about this, but like I have, like I said, this pretty technical background, a pretty like materialist interpretation of everything until about a year ago when I experienced a progressive spiritual emergence. So like basically did a lot of yoga, did a lot of breath work, and had what I would characterize as like complete communion with everything. And these experiences are frequently also reported as like experiencer experiences, like an encounter with the all or the sense of transcendence. And I bring this up because these are experiences. This was something that fundamentally changed my ontology and like how I interact with the world. And it was super disruptive. Like, and I'm someone who's very stable. I have a great career. I have a very strong support system, and it completely changed the trajectory of my life. And I just bring this up because I also think it's important to talk about these things because they're very common. Like lots of people have these experiences, something between 5 and 10% of the population, just naturally.
Mm-hmm.
And so you think that a part of this is a misinterpretation of that kind of experience?
I mean, I think, look, so my general opinion on this is that human minds do very interesting things all the time, and that our brains are basically high latency analog sensory or stimulation response devices. Throughout human history, there's always been reported encounters with the numinous and the mystical. And so when we talk about Ezekiel seeing the wheels in Revelations, and we talk about, seeing flying saucers over Roswell, I don't think it's that Ezekiel saw UFOs or that we're really seeing flying saucers. I think that there's probably some kind of ineffable, compelling third thing that we are then passing through basically a prism of cultural and social interpretation, and it just so happens that in 2022, our interpretation of this is by people whose minds were primed by things like the X-Files and Twin Peaks, whereas 500 years ago, Julian of Norwich in her, in the basement of the church, like her interpretation is through Christ, that was
the Netflix.
Yeah.
We've
or Philip K. Dick
addressing for something that's been around. I want to add that while I do think that those are factors and probably play a part in a good number of cases, I don't think that there is like a unified theory behind the phenomenon. You know what I mean? It's a multifaceted mystery. So there's a lot of things at play, and each one is different, and each one should be approached differently, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting a lot of shit because I ruined Nope for people. Become Death is like Luis already ruined Titanic for us by telling us it sinks. We did the review, so I'm assuming the 300 people that are watching were like, all right, watched our review, which is probably not the case. So I apologize if I ruined Nope. Oh my god, that's wouldn't be the show if I did something like that.
I mean, I think we don't have, and we shouldn't expect, like a grand unified theory of UFOs. Mm-hmm. And I do think everything has to be visited and evaluated on a discrete case-by-case basis. That doesn't mean that, like, it's very useful to have heuristics or frameworks to illuminate or discard things that are almost certainly prosaic, because what you're left over then is the really interesting, compelling, and mysterious stuff. And I think those are the cases, like Cash Landrum or like the Michigan case. Like, those are the really interesting things that deserve kind of the glut of energy and time.
Yeah,
absolutely.
There was two things I wanted to say, but I guess I have to pick a direction. And it would be, the thing that I find kind of odd is that I feel like in the 40s, 50s, and even 60s, we were getting crash landings. Mm-hmm. I felt like a lot. And now all of a sudden, I'm not hearing about crash landings anymore.
There's certain cases. If you look at the 90s, a lot of it was abductions relating to genetics and in vitro fertilization. The UNOM project were going on at the same time. So we all kind of create this baseline story, and we project it onto these things that we're seeing. I always joke about the thunder is God bowling hypothesis. I feel like that's kind of what we're doing with some of these sightings, where every person on the street knows, what a UFO is. It's a flying saucer with a humanoid alien driving it, and the government knows about them and they're hiding it. So when that average person on the street sees something bizarre, that's what it is to them. And then they believe, and then they go kind of confirming their bias as they go deeper and deeper and become a ufologist, I suppose, right? Right. At least a participant in UFO Twitter. So this kind of like cultural concept or this myth that we're creating is always evolving, and it's always reflective of where we are as a society, I think. And we just kind of put that on things. So maybe that's why we were seeing discs the newspapers helped with the discs too. And we saw the triangles in the 80s and the 90s. We see the
cigars.
We see the abduction and the genetic components in the 90s, and now we'll probably see more militaristic sightings, more tic tacs, things like that.
I also think that look, we're going through something of both a psychedelic and a spiritual renaissance right now. Like we see the promulgation of things like tarot, yoga, kind of ambiguous spirituality, quote unquote. And I think these, even if it's not directly conversations challenging material reality, instead you have kind of the popular imagination accepting non-material reality as a much more common experience in life. And I also think that that's why you see the emergence of or movement away from kind of the nuts and bolts hypotheses. Like the popular imagination is simply moving away from materialist interpretations of things.
Yeah, we see that where it's all kind of being categorized as the phenomenon now. I have a teenage daughter who is absolutely into tarot and crystals and all these kinds of things. All the things I used to write about 5 years ago and shit on. But I encourage it. It's still cool because it's weird. But yeah, it is becoming popular. You see it on TikTok. So I think you're hitting on something, Leah.
Yeah, it reminds me, I've brought this up before, but it reminds me of spiritualism and theosophy emerging when unseen compelling forces were entering into public experience. So things like radio or electricity or magnetism or telegrams, that like you have this, and then you also have the enormous amounts of human death in the Civil War and World War I. And these two things converge to basically create a religion, an ARG, basically, to understand and transpose these unseen forces into spirituality or into other areas of human experience.
And just to touch on another angle, Lou, I'd love to just touch on, like, because you had an experience that you recall distinctly and stuff like that. You've described that you could like see texture and things like that. And so from an academic perspective, like the UFO subject has been very well studied through an anthropological lens. And the primary interpretation through anthropology is that this is something that's happened this is peer reviewed papers for thousands of years, and the descriptions are actually quite consistent. And then you're applying different perspectives onto it. And then you have internal military documents that have been declassified where they're saying, oh, there is a physical object that exists. So you have public academic research from an anthropological lens saying like this is primarily a variety of different things that you're projecting onto, and like that's what's happening. It's a common psychology. And then the military, like the top leadership in the UK MOD was told, no, these are physical objects that are real that have these features. And it's like, we don't have proof of that in the public realm. So it's like right now, this is I think all of these things are important to be brought to the discussion, and I think that's what we're trying to do with this group. And but it just gets more and more complicated when you start looking at these different things, and I think that's part of why it's not often brought up in a skeptic perspective, because it's hard to grapple with the reality that top defense leadership were told UFOs were real in 2000 in the UK. Like, what the heck do you make of that? Like, what would Mick West make of that, right? He would just sort of be like, well, I guess they're, I don't know, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but it's interesting that way. I won't touch that.
Well, I mean, I going back to what you were saying, Leah, about the all of these different things happening in this time frame that leads to this emergence. Like, I feel like there's definitely something happening within our culture and the internet and communicating with each other, and I am fascinated to see where this goes, because I could see, the thing is, if you slow down and look at it, you can see the growing pains and things that at first were like, oh, that's a great idea. It's a wonderful way for people to communicate. 150 characters? Oh, they won't argue. This will be great.
Soundbite culture.
And then into the soundbite culture. But it also has led into long form conversations like this. Like, you can't do this on CNBC or Fox or anywhere else that has that corporate agenda or that painting of a picture that they're trying to do to force whatever direction they want to send you in. I mean, I think there's a real depth and thirst for conversations like this where it has the room to breathe. People have the room to disagree with each other. I just hope that this kind of dialogue is like COVID-19. I hope it spreads to everything and everyone. You know, like
So,
very weird analogy, but that's what I want. I want it to spread. Like I want more conversations, not only just from a ufology standpoint, but from a geopolitical standpoint, from a community standpoint. I thought. But then again, I've had this idea for a while, and I thought like by now, I felt like maybe conversations like this, or conversations about economics, or conversations about medical, discoveries. Like I felt like those things would really enrich society and sort of enlighten it and infuse it on a path where we start making great decisions for the environment and people's health and the well-being of your fellow human. And it's like, no, we're going to take this 3-hour conversation, we're going to whittle it down to 30 seconds, and that's what this whole conversation was about, and that's what we're going to judge it on. And it's like, fuck, dude, wow, how do we get rid of that? I don't. Should we get rid of it? And what are the repercussions for getting rid of it? There's so many unintended consequences to this technology, but it's interesting to sit back and see where the growing pains are and where I think things are. Like, I think 3D printing is amazing. To me, I think that's a technology that is going to revolutionize a lot of things once the tech really catches up to that idea.
I mean, what you're really talking about here, and this is where my personal beliefs will shine through, is look, like the extractive attention economy. So it is easily one of the most violent systems ever opened up on humanity in history. And this is predicated on mining the only finite resource that exists, which is human consciousness. And at any given time, we are all partaking in basically technology that is by design incentivized to addict us through cycles of dopamine release. And I say this as someone very candidly who has literally built these systems in some of the most lucrative industries on the planet, like building algorithmic marketing and recommendation systems. I have had my hands in the bellies of the beast. But I think you're also talking about, one of my favorite things, which is self-organization and complex systems. Like, you're basically we watch the internet sort of consolidate onto a very small handful of platforms: Reddit, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. And away from sort of the small kind of interesting pockets of the internet, like BBSs or the early Something Awful days. I say that as an inveterate goon for about 20 years. And we're kind of not regressing, but we are returning, I think, to the internet not being one big thing, but rather being sort of a connection of different nodes in this complex system, and a return to the initial spirit that founded the internet, which is the sharing of information and the opportunity to connect with people that you otherwise would not have interactions with. And I've heard these called dark forest communities because they're like little pockets of information. I mean, I consider the Invisible Night School a dark forest community because we're not trying to algorithmically generate audience members. We're creating niche content that requires some degree of intellectual engagement. It's not going to be for everybody, but it's sort of learning a secret handshake to bring in other people that want to sit at the kids' table, or at the cool kids' table in the cafeteria. And it's always, and I mean, I just think about having grown up on the internet, like, the magic of it for me as a weird kid. Like, I was into amateur radio, I was into computers. I mean, this is like the mid-90s. This is, this is not the kind of stuff your average like New York Jewess is into, but the internet let me talk to other people that were interested in that. And I mean, even now, like, how many people in my life can I talk to about Art Bell? Like, zero, none. But then I get on Twitter, or then I get on live streams, and like, I can get into like I can be Art Bell Rain Man and people can keep up, and it's amazing. Right. Yeah. And that's like the magic of the internet. And I think we've largely erased that for the last 15 or 20 years. And people are hungering for it again. People are desperate for human connection, especially after the last couple of years.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. Leah, the audience loves you, and you're absolutely nailing everything. Sorry, gentlemen, you're really sucking tonight.
Sorry, guys.
You guys are really, we're all sucking tonight. No, this has been a wonderful conversation. I can't wait to have you guys back for the big phone home. I think there's going to be a lot of great conversation. We've only have an hour, and and that sucks. So that means well, not really, because it means we'll be able to bring you back for more conversations. Because I think Leah just put us at the cool kids table in the cafeteria, and I'm all for that. Like, I want to be at the cool kids table, you know. And that's not to say that everyone's allowed to be a cool kid. Everyone's welcome. Sure. But I think you're right. I think it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea. But I think the beautiful thing about this is, or at least this side of the conversation, if there is a side of the conversation, is I don't feel like there's going to be any victory laps coming from us. You know, like we're not here to do touchdown dances when we get it right. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like, okay, cool, we got it right. How does that help the conversation? Does it help the conversation? If it doesn't, then who cares? Does it matter if we got it right? Oh, great. All right, awesome. Whatever. It's another thing to look for.
Truth matters, right?
Yeah, the truth matters. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. If it reveals truth, right? You know, and the idea of like Leah said, being able to change your mind as the data changes. Mm-hmm. You know, not having the fortitude and the moxie to be like, I was wrong. Data's different now.
My favorite things people say are, I don't know, and I've changed my mind. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
Like those are the two most exciting things to hear from people, because it's an opportunity to learn and it's an opportunity to explore.
No, that's a great point. And I feel like, man, for a little bit, I was kind of afraid of it, you know, because it's enchanting having an audience, you know, that doesn't really want you to ask that.
Sure.
You know, and it's like, well, shit, you know, but it has to be asked. Like, it's saying I don't know and trying to find out things that you don't know and getting clarity on things is important. And again, it's there's two things. The first thing we're asking for in the Big Phone Home is the strengthening of the FOIA. Like, the idea that there should be a better process to it. Citizens have the ability to help our local government or our state government in getting answers on this discussion and answers to a lot of other things outside of the UFO community. And the other thing is we're asking for clarity in ways that should be pretty easy to provide. For example, you know, the 3 videos. We know there's definitely a longer version of the gimbal. There's 4 more minutes of it, according to Lieutenant Graves.
Yeah, so we've heard.
Let's see it. Let's add some clarity to the discussion. Let's see the full version of the Tic Tac. Let's see the full version of the Go Fast, and let's get some clarity on this, so that way discussions like this can start getting some solutions and some answers and things to graph, but also things to look for in the future. So when we see stuff like this prop up again, we can say, oh, we've already got a data set on something like that, and it happened, you know, blah 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 blah. I think the conversation's getting exciting, and you guys help fuel that excitement. These kind of conversations and the things that I hear you guys doing in Twitter Spaces, it's valuable, and I'm here for it.
Awesome.
Yeah. One of the things that really excites me, and where I think there is huge opportunity and work to be done, is reconciling disparate data, right? We now have the technology and capabilities to do efforts like that at scale. And I think, you know, one of the reasons we haven't made much traction, either publicly or governmentally, on this subject may really be that nobody's, going back to my point about things being in archives that nobody knows about. Like, it's only recently that we have the capabilities of building the data architecture and algorithms to surface insights from millions and millions of records. You know, we can build systems that can comprehend and analyze data in a far superior way than the human mind. And I say this as someone who's a huge critic of AI and machine learning, and take every opportunity to speak against sort of the public imagination and its dark magic about AI. But the reality is that systems exist that are so vast and complex, and the data contained in them so numerous, that the human mind just can't, like, there's just not enough years in your life to read through every single line. So instead we build algorithms that do this for us. And then our mind does the really cool shit, which is analyze complex data in a meaningful way, and contextualize it socially. But to me, like, that feels like the next big step. And that was also what was so heartening about the NASA project, is that I saw this as basically a really great way to start building a very standardized quantitative and qualitative data model that resources, whether historical or contemporary or future, could be looped into and then analyzed at scale rather than, individually. And to Jacques Vallée's credit, this was something that, he really started trying to do. But I think, right now, with our capabilities, with public enthusiasm and interest, that could be one of the most powerful things to come out of any of this.
No, that's I would love this for that to happen, to come to fruition, right? Like, I think that would be a good point, a good place to be. Do you foresee, because I think a big part of this is funding, and a lot of funding comes from government. Do you think that's a slippery slope, or is that something that can be done and actual data can be derived from it?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's sort of like a triple helix here. Like, funding comes from government, it comes from the military, and it comes from private industry. And even in academic spaces, this is the provenance of where money originates. It doesn't come from tuition payments.
But also innovation, right? Can we say innovation as well?
What do you mean?
Like, innovation comes from that funding.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, we're on
Right.
the internet because of ARPA and stuff, like, for sure. Innovation, definitely. I mean, our cell phones, our GPS systems is all, military technology from 20 or 30 years ago.
Right.
I mean, I think, look, I could really get on my soapbox here and talk about the importance of more investment in just sort of the public intellectual space, right? That you could have government funding, but it would be more akin to something like a MacArthur grant or a Fulbright grant, where this money is given to promising scholars or academics or institutions who are then given the freedom to pursue the research in accordance with their own standards. I think that something like that would be legit. When we're talking about endowments of initiatives within the government, that's a little bit more concerning to me. I mean, I even think there's a compelling argument to be made that the Galileo project should be spun out of Harvard. And I say that, because what it would then do is take it out of the ivory tower pressure cooker to publish or perish. And it gives, like something, this is why I keep going back to some of these larger research organizations. They have their shortcomings, but something like Rand or Brookings, particularly with an interdisciplinary background, like that to me is where the real promise and future lies in exploring this subject.
Well, and Lou, I think that your move towards the elected officials is the right one based on the history that we have from both the United States and the UK, because that's where we've actually seen information emerge from the inside. Like, from the inside of the intelligence agencies, like, they aren't acting in an evil way. They are operating based on how they perceive the national security interests of the country. They're all individuals operating with individual goals, generally pro-social, I would argue.
Right.
But they are not forthcoming with this information, and it has to be pulled out of them. And to the extent that it will be, it'll have to be through these publicly elected people who are frustrated knowing that things are being withheld, and there has to be so much pressure to get up to that line where it is the definitive point where it's becoming a threat to national security to reveal it. And I think you're on the right track with putting that pressure on.
Well, yeah, I mean, my whole pitch to lawmakers is like, let us help you relieve that pressure. Give us the tools to do it. I mean, FOIA is a great tool, but also, I think that the people have great questions. We have great questions and great things to put on the table. And so when I see that the Aero office has a Twitter account, Aero should be hosting a Twitter space once a month with Dr. Kirkpatrick and Moultrie and answering questions for an hour or putting up a presentation and answering questions for 20 minutes. And whoever gets in, but at least there's an opportunity to try and get in there and have a dialogue with us. I think that would go a long, long way to building a lot of trust.
Well, the CIA's chief historian, Gerald K. Hines, wrote about this in a book he published in 1997 about the CIA's role in investigating UFOs, 1940 to 1992 or something like that was the title. And he says in it, Every time the CIA classified something and resisted freedom of information access, the cover-up was always more damaging to the agency's reputation than the actual content that they were trying to hide. And you see that over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah. Them trying to cover it up just is way shadier.
And it ruins their reputation.
Yeah, and it ruins the reputation. Yeah. And I think yeah, you're saying it, and also I think Leah, you touched on it. Like all these 3-letter alphabet agencies, for the most part, and lawmakers, their trust is zero.
Politicians, yeah,
it's gone.
There's zero confidence.
Zero confidence at any level.
Record.
Yeah,
yeah,
and that's a dangerous place to be. Like that's a national security issue, and
true.
And the fact that we're kind of blowing by it almost feels like a Rome falling kind of thing.
Right, we're unwinding reality, right?
Yeah.
Like, and once, like, I keep going back to this. Like, once you start eliminating consensus reality, it's a very slippery slope from there. And I think that, I mean, honestly, I think UFOs, UAPs, that subject contributes to that. Right? Because it
well, that's my biggest fear, Leah.
It turns all of reality into this like negotiation, and removes any sort of meaningful critical analysis from the public conversation.
Yeah.
My fear
in 200 years would be the archive of my show and somebody pointing it and going, see, this is what happened. They were believing in UFOs. They took medicine. They spit on its face. You know, like they completely ate themselves.
I mean, for all of human history, except the last 300 years, humans lived lives of superstition and myth and tradition and ritual and tribalism. And there's honestly no compelling reason to just think that the last few hundred years were an aberration and we will just naturally regress back to that state. Isn't that nice to think about?
We just got lucky for a couple thousand years.
For like 300 years, we got to live like kings. We had vaccinations, air conditioning, Uber
running
Eats.
water, toilets.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Rome in a way was kind of like that. I mean, we went from Rome to the Dark Ages we went from running water in toilets to throwing our shit in the street because we didn't know how to do it.
Yeah, but let's not undersell the Dark Ages though as a period of great artistic and intellectual creativity, right? Like the germ theory as we know it didn't evolve like with public health until John Snow and the Broad Street Pump of 1953. And even now, like the complexity of the human body and our actual knowledge of medicine, for example, is actually much more limited than popular conception indicates. Like we're very good at doing things like fixing broken legs and appendixes, but like the idea, like the serotonin theory of depression is currently blowing up, and there's a lot more. Treating the complexity of medicine as just a transactional linear system is like totally short-sighted and kind of hubristic, really. Like,
well, I mean,
it's very reductionist.
Look what we did with psychedelics, and now all of a sudden, psychedelics is like this new field of medicine.
That's my second favorite subject after aliens.
Wow,
so
great. They're gonna look at this archive and go see psychedelics and aliens as well.
Also unwinding, also serve to unwind the fabric of reality, but go a very long way towards mitigating human suffering. So, in that sense, I'm pretty cool with it.
Right on. Oh man. Well, you guys, this has been one of my favorite conversations on the show.
Okay.
Thanks, Lou.
Yeah, this is a lot of fun. I think everybody in the audience really enjoyed it. I didn't see too many Sonic Gravity. Have you guys talked to Bradley Voorhees by chance in any of these Twitter spaces? Have you guys talked to him yet? Sonic Gravity?
No.
He's got a pretty wild theory about black holes being a donut. And
Nice.
Oh yeah, he's holographic reality and stuff like that.
Yeah. It's a pretty wild theory. You got to be patient to listen to the whole thing. But yeah, he's very big on it. Very, very big on it. I'd be interested if he ever pops in your space, what you guys would think of the theory. What's it? Yeah. I'm sure you'll see him there. I mean, now he knows who you guys are. Before you guys get out of here, I mean, where can people find these spaces, where they can find your work individually? I put all of your links in the description below. But
Sure.
the floor is yours. Go for it.
Sure. So I'm Leah Prime on Twitter. I advertise our Twitter spaces associated with the Invisible Night School. We hold them about weekly. We'll be holding one this Monday evening on non-human intelligence with special guest Rather Be Squidding. I'm also going to be launching my own project very shortly called Version Zero. And the best place to hear about that right now is just following me on Twitter. It'll probably be pretty similar to the Invisible Night School spaces and then also live streams.
Ooh, yeah, you're going to kill it, Leah. You're going to be great. I can't wait to have you back on the show. I'll be honest with you. Nick Coffin-Callis, what about you, sir?
You can find me at Invisible Night School on Twitter and at our blog, theinvisiblenightschool.com.
And walking encyclopedia, Mr. Campbell Moreira, sir. Yeah,
nice.
It was great to have you back.
Great to be
and it was great to see that you guys formed this cool table in the lunchroom. But please, let everyone know where they can find your work, Campbell.
Yeah, well, let me put all the credit to, well, not all, but most of the credit to Leah and Nick. They're really leading this, and I respect them a lot in many ways. And my stuff, UAP Study on Twitter, and then my website, uapstudy.com, and then on the Invisible Night School blog. Been doing writing.
I love it. Well, you guys, again, thank you so much for helping helping me in the absence of Jane and Rather not being able to be here. I've really wanted to talk about this Calvine UFO photo. I've just been thinking about it the second it's come out, and this conversation was perfect. Really, really enjoyed it. I think there was a lot of wonderful, rational thinking. And it was just a cool conversation, and it's nice to know that these conversations are allowed to be had without being put in front of a firing squad. I'm sure there are, who knows? A lot of people watch the show. I'm sure there'll be some members of the firing squad coming out. But hey, man, again, like we prefaced the conversation with, amazing find. Great day for ufology. Great day for the discussion. Great day for information, data. Great day to have discussions.
Calvine's like my desktop background right now, just to say. Like, I love that photo.
You guys know about the disclosure clock?
Of course.
Yes.
Okay, so I think we're gonna move it back to pretty much Rather Be Squidding. We're
fair.
Perfect.
Yeah, we're at 8:24. It looks like on the disclosure clock. So we got a long way before we're at full blown disclosure when we hit McWest. But I think discussions like this and days like this and the work that's been done to lead the days like this is beautiful. It's awesome. And hats off to, again, everyone who had a hand in bringing this information forward. I think you guys did a bang up job. There's more, like with every time with this damn topic, more data comes, more questions emerge. And so, let's see if we can get some more answers to these questions. But yeah, again, you guys, I really appreciate you guys coming by, and we'll see you this Friday.
Yeah.
Big Phone Home 3. I'm going to make the schedule this weekend. I'll give you guys the schedule. And I can't wait either. I think it's going to be a killer hour-long discussion. But
awesome.
But thank you guys. I'm going to close out the show and take you guys off screen here. Thank you, Nick, Leah, Campbell. That was an amazing discussion. Thank you, everybody in the chat. If you guys haven't already, if you like the show, obviously click the like button, share the show, subscribe even. I mean, that could be cool if you subscribe. It helps. If we have a whole archive of shows, over 300 shows, no paywall. You're more than welcome to go back and check them out. If you really, really love this show, we have a Patreon. Link is in the description below. Every dollar helps. It helps me have more conversations like this, spend less time at real jobs, and this is fun. This is a fun way to live. But anyway, you guys, thank you so much for coming aboard, getting weird with us here on another episode of the Unidentified Celebrity Review. Your home for credible news, reviews, commentary on everything UAP and UFO. Until Thursday, we'll see you soon. Check out Monday. We're launching our Big Phone Home 3 website, so stay tuned for Monday. We're also going to be releasing a list of guests, so stay tuned for that. Monday's going to be a big day for the show, although we're not doing a show, but for the Big Phone Home. It's going to be cool. It's going to be a really cool event. So check that out. And then, help us use the hashtag the Big Phone Home 3. It goes a long way into helping spread awareness. We've got the show coming up on Friday. It's going to be from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. Pacific Standard. We're going to be calling our representatives. We're going to be asking for a lot of things. We'll go over that on Friday's show or Thursday show. But until next time, you guys, love you all. Have a great weekend. Peace. I'm going to tell y'all right now, all of these wonderful people would not be here without Patreon supporters like you. If you enjoy credible news, reviews, and commentary on UFOs and UAPs 5 days a week, you want to support this show. What's your name? Marty. Marty, look how easy this is, Marty. Pick up your phone. Boom! You're a Patreon member. I mean, look, it's so easy. You just click the link, which is right here. Just for $1 a month, you can support this show. Just fill out the information and pledge what's comfortable for you. It could be $1, $5, $10, or who knows. Just support.